The police report filed by the Somerset Constabulary is dry, clinical, and frustratingly incomplete. It lists the time of the disappearance as 4:12 p.m. on a Saturday in July. It lists the weather conditions as severe, citing a localized supercell thunderstorm that formed with almost impossible speed over the countryside. It lists the witnesses, his wife, his brother, and 2 neighbors, all of whom were sober, and all of whom told the investigating officers the exact same impossible story. But the police report doesn't talk about the trousers. That detail was buried in a supplementary forensic file that wasn't released to the public until years later. You see, the police couldn't explain the missing footprints in the mud. The doctors later couldn't explain the complete lack of electrical burns on a man who had allegedly taken a direct hit from a gigawatt of electricity. But the textile experts, they were the ones who were truly terrified. Because the pants Peter Williamson came back wearing didn't exist on Earth. When the lab analyzed the fabric swatches taken from the garment, the mass spectrometer returned results that looked like glitches. The weave was seamless, literally. There was no thread count because there were no individual threads. It was a single, continuous sheet of matter that mimicked the appearance of denim but felt like warm, dry mercury. The stitching wasn't done with a machine. The seams appeared to be fused at a molecular level. Peter Williamson left his garden wearing a pair of standard Levi's 501s bought at a Debenhams in Bristol. He returned 3 days later wearing something that looked like pants, but were engineered by a technology we are centuries away from inventing. This is not a story about a missing person. This is a story about where he went, and more importantly, who or what sent him back dressed in the impossible. Welcome to the Peter Williamson case. The setting for the most disturbing event in British paranormal history could not have been more mundane. It was Somerset, England. The kind of place where the rolling green hills look like a patchwork quilt, stitched together by ancient hedgerows and mossy stone walls. It was the height of summer, July 14th. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of cut grass and impending rain. Peter Williamson was 42 years old. He was a man of habits, a man of structure. He wasn't a thrill seeker. He wasn't a conspiracy theorist. He was a regional manager for a logistics firm who liked his lawn manicured and his tea strong. On this particular Saturday, he was hosting a barbecue. Picture the scene. It is the definition of domestic safety. You can hear the sizzle of fat rendering on the charcoal grill. You can hear the clinking of glass bottles as Peter's brother, David, fishes a beer out of a cooler filled with melting ice. There is laughter. Peter's wife, Sarah, is cutting up a watermelon on the patio table. It is the picture-perfect image of reality, solid, predictable, safe. But nature has a way of shifting the atmosphere before we even realize the danger is there. Around 3:00 p.m., the light changed. It didn't just get dark. The quality of the light shifted from a warm summer gold to a bruised, sickly yellow. The birds, which had been singing loudly in the oak trees bordering the property, suddenly went silent. That is always the first sign. The silence. It's a biological alarm bell that rings in the deep reptilian part of your brain. Peter looked up from the grill. The humidity spiked instantly. It became oppressive, like a heavy, wet woolen blanket draped over the entire garden. The hair on his arms stood up, not from fear, not yet, but from static. The air was becoming electrically charged. The clouds rolled in over the hills, not drifting, but churning, towering anvils of gray and black, rotating with a violence that seemed disproportionate to the mild English countryside. This wasn't just a summer shower. This was an atmospheric assault. The guests began to pack up. The laughter died down, replaced by the hurried scraping of chairs and the gathering of plates. "Looks like a bad one," David said, pointing his beer bottle toward the horizon. Within 10 minutes, the wind hit. It tore through the garden, ripping leaves from the trees and overturning the patio umbrella. It was chaos. But in that chaos, Peter realized something. The dog. Barnaby, their golden retriever, wasn't under the table. He wasn't by the back door. Peter squinted into the darkening yard. The garden was long, roughly 80 feet, enclosed entirely by a 6-foot brick wall that dated back to the Victorian era. At the far end, huddled near the compost heap, was Barnaby. The dog was pressed flat against the ground, whining, too terrified to move. Peter didn't hesitate. He was a pragmatic man, and in his mind, this was just a task to be completed. "Get the dog, get inside, wait out the rain." He handed the tongs to his wife. "I'll grab him," he said. Those were the last words Peter Williamson would speak in this version of reality for 72 hours. As he stepped off the patio and onto the grass, the sky ripped open. But before we follow Peter into the storm, I have to ask you something. Question: do you believe that during a storm, the veil between worlds gets thinner? Have you ever seen something in a lightning flash that shouldn't be there? A shape, a shadow, a landscape that isn't ours? Answer yes or no in the comments below. Because what happens next suggests that lightning isn't just electricity. It might be a door. Subscribe now to step through the veil with us, because Peter Williamson is running across the lawn and the door is about to open. Peter ran. He kept his head down, shielding his eyes from the grit and dry leaves whipping through the air. The distance from the patio to the compost heap was only 80 feet, a distance he could cover in seconds. But as he crossed the halfway point of the lawn, the atmosphere became physical. It wasn't just wind anymore. It felt as if the air had solidified, turning into a thick, gelatinous pressure that pushed against his chest. Sarah, watching from the safety of the glass sliding doors, later told police that the garden looked like a photograph that was being overexposed. The vibrant green of the grass was bleaching out, turning a stark, blinding white. The sky wasn't dark anymore, it was glowing with a violet, pulsating energy. Peter reached the end of the garden. Barnaby was shaking, his claws dug deep into the soil. Peter knelt. He grabbed the dog's collar with his left hand. "It's okay, boy," he shouted over the roar of the wind. "I've got you." He turned to run back toward the house. He took one step, and then the world ended. It wasn't a sound. It was a physical blow. The lightning didn't strike a tree or a lightning rod. It struck Peter. From the patio, Sarah and David saw a column of pure white plasma connect with the earth. It was thicker than a tree trunk, blindingly bright, and deafeningly loud, a crack that sounded like the sky's spine snapping. The force of the thunderclap rattled the fillings in their teeth and shattered the glass of the sliding door. Sarah screamed, covering her face as shards of glass sprayed onto the kitchen floor. When the light faded, the smell hit them. It wasn't the smell of rain. It was the smell of burning ozone, ionized air, and something sharper, like burning copper. "Peter!" David yelled, stumbling out onto the patio, ignoring the glass. The rain began to fall then, a torrential, freezing downpour that hissed as it hit the scorched earth. David ran into the yard. Sarah followed, sobbing. They ran to the spot where Peter had been standing. The grass was gone. In its place was a circle of charred earth, smoking in the rain. In the center of the circle, shivering and whining, was Barnaby the dog. He was unharmed. His leash was lying on the ground, the metal clip still attached to his collar. But Peter was gone. David spun around, scanning the yard. "Peter! Peter!" The garden was enclosed by that 6-foot brick wall. There was no gate at the back. To leave the garden, Peter would have had to run past them into the house or scale a 6-foot wall in under a second while being electrocuted. David ran to the wall. He jumped up, pulling himself up to look over into the neighbor's property. It was empty. He looked at the mud at the base of the wall. The rain was heavy, but the ground was soft. If Peter had climbed, there would be footprints, scuff marks, disturbed moss. There was nothing. The police arrived 10 minutes later. They cordoned off the garden. They brought in sniffer dogs. The dogs ran straight to the scorch mark, sniffed the collar, and then sat down, confused. The scent trail didn't lead away. It didn't go to the wall, it didn't go to the house. The trail simply ended in the center of the lawn, as if Peter Williamson had been erased from existence. But Peter hadn't been erased. He had been moved. While Sarah was screaming in the rain, Peter Williamson was standing in silence. There was no transition, no tunnel of light, no life flashing before his eyes. One moment, he was kneeling on the grass, reaching for his dog, the roar of the wind filling his ears. The next moment, he was standing upright. The wind was gone. The rain was gone. The smell of ozone was gone, replaced by a smell that was cloyingly sweet, like antiseptic mixed with stale vanilla. Peter blinked. He was still squinting, expecting the sting of the wind. But the air here was still, perfectly, terrifyingly still. He opened his eyes fully. He wasn't in his garden. He was in a hallway. It was long, stretching out in both directions into a vanishing point that seemed too far away to be real. The walls were a pale, creamy white, made of a material that wasn't quite plastic and wasn't quite metal. It was seamless. The floor was the same material, soft under his boots. "Hello?" Peter's voice sounded flat, deadened. The acoustics were wrong. There was no echo, as if the walls were absorbing the sound instantly. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking. He checked his body. He was wearing his flannel shirt and his jeans. He felt his chest. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird, but he felt no pain, no burns. He remembered the flash. He remembered the sensation of being hit by a freight train of light. But there wasn't a mark on him. "Is anybody there?" He called out again. He started walking. He didn't know why, but the instinct to move was overwhelming. He felt exposed, like an insect on a dissection tray. He walked for what felt like 10 minutes, but his watch had stopped. The second hand was frozen at 4:12. Eventually, he came to a door. It was flush with the wall, no handle, just a rectangular outline. As he approached, it slid open with a soft hiss. Inside was a room that looked like a doctor's office, but interpreted by someone who had never actually seen one. There was a table in the center, metallic and cold. There were instruments on a tray, silver, curved, complex shapes that had no obvious function. And there were 3 figures standing there. They were tall. They wore coats that looked like heavy, rubberized lab coats. Their faces were obscured by masks, or perhaps helmets, that reflected the white light of the room, making them look faceless. Peter froze in the doorway. "Where am I? Who are you?" The figure in the center turned. It didn't speak, but Peter heard a voice in his head. It wasn't telepathy in the way movies show it. It felt like a memory of a voice, surfacing from deep within his own mind. "The patient is early," the voice thought. "Prepare the graft," another voice answered. The figures moved toward him. They moved with a fluidity that was unnatural, too smooth, lacking the micro-movements of human hesitation. Peter tried to back away, but his legs wouldn't work. It wasn't paralysis. It was a total disconnect between his brain and his muscles. He was guided gently but irresistibly onto the table. He lay there, staring up at a ceiling that was a single panel of glowing light. He felt hands on him. Cold, dry hands. They were unbuttoning his shirt. They were checking his skin. "I don't have any burns," Peter stammered, his panic finally breaking through the confusion. "I'm not hurt. Let me go." The figures ignored him. One of them brought a device close to Peter's face. It hummed with a low vibration that made Peter's teeth ache. "Tissue integrity is high," the voice in his head said. "The burning has not occurred yet. We must reinforce the lower quadrants." "What burning?" Peter yelled. "I'm not burned." "Not yet," the voice soothed. "But the return trip is hot. The friction of the veil is hot." They began to work on his legs. He couldn't see what they were doing, but he could feel a sensation of intense cold, like ice being pressed against his skin. They were removing his jeans. He tried to kick, to fight, but his body was heavy, sinking into the table as if gravity here was twice as strong. He felt something being slid onto his legs. It felt fluid, like they were painting him with liquid metal. It moved up his calves, over his knees, up his thighs. It tightened, constricting like a second skin, then relaxed, molding perfectly to his form. "Protective layer applied," the voice said. "Standard weave for atmospheric re-entry." Peter's vision began to blur. The white light of the ceiling started to pulse, matching the rhythm of the lightning storm he had left behind. He felt a tugging sensation in his navel, a hook pulling him backward. "Wait," Peter whispered. "How long have I been here?" The figure leaned over him. The reflective mask was inches from Peter's face. In the reflection, Peter saw himself, but he looked older, grayer. "3 cycles," the voice said. "You must go back. The aperture is closing." "3 cycles?" Peter slurred. 3 minutes? The figure didn't answer. The room began to spin. The white walls dissolved into streaks of light. The smell of antiseptic vanished, replaced instantly by the smell of wet earth and rain. The silence of the hallway was shattered by a scream. It was his own scream. It had been 72 hours. The search for Peter Williamson had turned into a grid search recovery operation. The local police, aided by volunteers, had combed every inch of the surrounding woodlands, the drainage ditches, and the neighboring properties. They found nothing, no shredded clothing, no shoes, no body. It was Tuesday afternoon. The sky was a painfully clear blue, mocking the storm that had started this nightmare. Sarah was sitting on the patio steps, staring at the scorch mark in the lawn, which had turned into a muddy scar. David was standing by the back door, on the phone with the detective inspector, trying to explain for the 100th time that his brother didn't have any enemies, didn't have any debts, and didn't just walk away from his life. "I'm telling you, he was right there," David said, his voice cracking. "He didn't run. He just—" And then the sound happened. It wasn't a thunderclap this time. It was the sound of a vacuum seal breaking, a sharp, violent thwump that displaced the air in the garden. A shockwave rippled through the grass. David dropped the phone. Sarah stood up, her hands flying to her mouth. In the center of the scorch mark, where a split second ago there had been nothing but air, a figure collapsed onto the grass. It was Peter. He didn't land on his feet. He fell as if he had been dropped from a height of 6 inches, crumbling into a heap. He was gasping for air, loud, desperate heaves that sounded like a man surfacing from deep water. "Peter!" Sarah screamed, sprinting across the lawn. David was right behind her. They reached him at the same time. Peter was curled into a fetal position, his eyes squeezed shut, his hands clawing at the grass. "Get away!" Peter shrieked, his voice hoarse. "Don't touch the light! Don't touch it!" "It's me, Peter! It's Sarah!" She grabbed his shoulders. He flinched violently, then opened his eyes. He looked at her, then at the garden, then at the sky. The terror in his gaze was primal. He looked like an animal that had just escaped a trap. "Sarah," he whispered. He reached out and touched her face, his fingers trembling. "You're real? You're solid?" "I'm real, baby, I'm real. You're home." David was checking him over. "He's boiling," David said, recoiling. "Sarah, be careful, his skin is burning up." Peter was radiating heat, not a fever, radiating it like a stone left in a fire. Steam was actually rising from his shoulders into the cool afternoon air. "Call an ambulance," Sarah yelled. David scrambled for his dropped phone. But as he dialed, he noticed something. He stopped. He looked at Peter's legs. "Sarah," David said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "What is he wearing?" Sarah looked down. Peter had left the house wearing a pair of faded, comfortable blue jeans, Levi's 501s, size 34 waist. The things on his legs now were blue. They were the shape of pants. But they weren't jeans. They caught the sunlight with a strange, oily sheen. They looked smooth, synthetic, and utterly alien. Peter followed their gaze. He looked at his own legs. He touched the fabric. He frowned, a look of profound confusion crossing his face. "They gave me these," Peter mumbled, his eyes rolling back in his head. For the friction. They said, for the friction. And then, Peter Williamson passed out. Peter was rushed to Taunton's Musgrove Park Hospital. He was treated for severe dehydration and symptoms consistent with rapid decompression, similar to the bends divers get. But the real drama wasn't happening in the emergency room. It was happening in the prep room where the nurses were trying to undress him. "We need to get these pants off to check for femoral injuries," the attending physician ordered. A nurse grabbed a pair of heavy-duty trauma shears. She slid the bottom blade under the cuff of the blue material at Peter's ankle. She squeezed the handle. Nothing happened. The shears didn't cut. They didn't even make a dent. The fabric didn't bunch up or tear. It was impenetrable. "What is this?" the nurse muttered. She tried again, using 2 hands, straining with all her strength. The metal of the scissors groaned, and then snap. The handle of the medical-grade steel shears broke in her hand. The room went silent. The doctor stared at the broken scissors on the floor. He reached out and touched the pants. They felt warm, but not like body heat. They felt like they were generating their own low-level energy. The texture was impossible to describe. It was smooth as glass, but had a grip to it, like shark skin. "Pull them off," the doctor said quietly. "Just pull them off like normal." They managed to slide the garment off Peter's unconscious body. As soon as the pants were removed, they didn't crumble or fold like normal fabric. They held their shape for a moment, ghostly legs lying on the gurney before slowly settling flat. The hospital contacted the police. The police, baffled, contacted a forensic lab. The pants were bagged, tagged as Evidence Item 0 Row 1, and sent to a specialized textile laboratory in Manchester. Dr. Aris Thorne was the lead materials scientist on duty. He had spent 30 years analyzing fibers, from ancient Egyptian linen to modern Kevlar ballistic weaves. He thought he had seen everything. He placed a swatch of Peter Williamson's pants under the electron microscope. He adjusted the focus, expecting to see the twisted fibers of cotton or the synthetic strands of polyester. He stepped back from the eyepiece, his face pale. "There's no weave," he told his assistant. "What do you mean, no weave?" "I mean it's not woven, it's not knitted, it's not felted." Dr. Thorne put the image up on the main monitor. The screen showed a smooth, continuous landscape. There were no gaps, no threads. It looked like a solid block of blue matter that had been extruded or grown. "Look at the chemical composition," Thorne said, pulling up the spectrometer data. "It's carbon-based, but the lattice structure, it's hexagonal. It's perfect. It's graphene, but stabilized in a way that shouldn't be possible. If this is graphene, these pants are worth more than the GDP of a small country. And they are bulletproof." Thorne picked up the pants. He turned them inside out. "Here's the kicker," he whispered. "Look at the label." The assistant leaned in. Inside the waistband, where a tag should have been, there was no paper or fabric loop. Instead, there were symbols embossed directly into the material. They weren't English. They weren't Chinese. They weren't any known human alphabet. They were geometric shapes, circles, triangles, and lines that glowed faintly when the light hit them. Thorne ran his thumb over the symbols. "Peter Williamson didn't buy these at a department store," he said. "He didn't get these on Earth. Or at least, not our Earth." Back in the hospital room, Peter woke up. He sat up in bed, his eyes wide. He looked at the nurse standing by the door. "The White Room," he whispered. "I have to go back to the White Room." "Mr. Williamson, you're safe," the nurse said. "No," Peter said, clutching the bed sheets. "You don't understand. They gave me the suit because the journey back is hot. They said I'd need it for next time." "Next time?" Peter looked at the window, where the clouds were starting to gather again. "They said I'm a conductor now," he said, "and they're coming back to finish the circuit." So, where did Peter Williamson go for those 72 hours? The official explanation, if you can call it that, remained a jagged hole in the police files. The case was eventually marked as closed, resolved, simply because the missing person had returned. But for those who looked deeper, the resolution was more terrifying than the disappearance. There are three prevailing theories about the Peter Williamson incident. Theory number 1, the abduction. Ufologists point to the White Room and the tall, masked figures as a classic visitation scenario. The medical examination, the time dilation, the strange implants or gifts, it fits the profile. But usually abductees are returned with scars or lost time, not advanced nanotechnology protecting their legs. If this was an abduction, it wasn't for study. It was for preservation. They wanted him back in one piece. Why? Theory number 2, the glitch. This theory suggests that the lightning strike acted as a massive energy surge that overloaded the local reality rendering. Peter didn't move space, he moved state. He clipped out of bounds like a video game character falling through the floor of the map. The White Room wasn't a hospital. It was a debug room, a holding area where the system tried to patch the error before reinserting him into the simulation. The pants were simply a rendering error, a texture file from a different asset library that got swapped onto his character model. Theory number 3, quantum immortality. This is the one that keeps me up at night. In this theory, Peter Williamson did die in that garden. The lightning strike incinerated him instantly, but his consciousness, refusing to end, simply skipped the groove of the record. It jumped to the nearest available timeline where he survived. In that parallel timeline, perhaps humanity is more advanced. Perhaps they have medicine that can treat lightning strikes before they happen. Perhaps they have clothing made of graphene. The Peter we have now isn't our Peter. He is a refugee from a timeline that is just a few degrees to the left of ours. A timeline where the future arrived early. But what about Peter himself? Peter Williamson never went back to work. He never hosted another barbecue. He sold the house in Somerset 3 months after the incident. The real estate listing mentioned a well-maintained garden, but made no mention of the scorch mark that refused to grow grass. He lives in a basement apartment in London now. He chose it because it is underground, no windows, no view of the sky. His wife Sarah left him a year later. She told friends that she couldn't stay. She said that the man who came back looked like Peter and sounded like Peter, but he felt static. She said that when she touched him, she didn't feel warmth. She felt a low-frequency hum, like holding your hand against a high-voltage pylon. Peter spends his days studying meteorology and quantum physics. He has filled dozens of notebooks with sketches of the symbols he saw on the waistband of the pants. He is looking for a way back, not because he wants to leave us, but because he is afraid. He told his brother, in one of their final conversations, that he is living on borrowed time. "They fixed me up," Peter said. "They put the pants on me so I could survive the trip back here. But they made a mistake. They didn't anchor me." "What does that mean?" David asked. Peter looked up, his eyes haunted. "It means I'm still charged, David. I'm a lightning rod now, and every time it storms I can feel them pulling. They want their pants back, and they don't care if I'm still inside them. As for the artifact itself, the lightning pants, 2 weeks after Dr. Thorne analyzed them, the lab in Manchester was visited by men who showed identification cards from a department that doesn't officially exist. They confiscated the samples. They confiscated the hard drives. They confiscated the pants. Dr. Thorne was told it was a matter of national security. He was told to forget the hexagonal lattice. He was told to forget the symbols. But you can't forget something that rewrites the laws of physics. The Peter Williamson case remains one of the few instances where the impossible didn't just leave a footprint, it left a souvenir. We like to think that we understand the world. We think that gravity, time, and matter are constants. We think that when we walk into our garden, we are walking on solid ground. But Peter Williamson taught us that the ground is thin, and the sky is heavy. And sometimes, when the energy is just right, the universe makes a mistake. So, here is my advice to you. The next time the summer air gets heavy and the birds stop singing, don't go outside to check the weather. The next time you see a flash of lightning that looks a little too violet, a little too thick, don't look directly at it. You might see a garden that isn't yours. You might see a white room. Or if you're really unlucky, you might look out the window and see yourself, standing in the rain, wearing clothes you haven't bought yet, trying desperately to get back in. If you enjoyed this journey into the unexplained, please hit the like button. It helps the algorithm find other travelers. And if you want to be notified the next time we peel back the layers of reality, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Until then, stay safe and watch the sky.